Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Ftbd. For the uninitiated, that is Fuck the Black Dog. This is a podcast that is all about mental health, the pros, the cons, absolutely everything. And we have an amazing guest for you today. If this is your first time tuning in, you've actually hit the jackpot. For most people, this man needs no introduction. If you don't know his name, chances are you're either a millennial or a communist. Either way, you need to rectify that immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my immense pleasure to introduce Mr. Gary Angry Anderson. Welcome to the show.
A millennial or a communist.
I'm not wrong, though.
That's something that actually would come so easily out of my own mouth because my kids, most fathers are a constant source of amusement for their kids anyway, regardless of whether they've got a public profile or whatever. But you can imagine the source of amusement that I've always been from my kids. Like when they were little, we'd go out in public and, people would talk to me about photos and all that kind of shit. So they found that hysterical, right? That's amusing, because they were struggling to understand the concept of, dad's famous or, well-known, whatever, like you put it.
Yeah.
I used to explain to them that I wasn't famous, I was infamous, but that's another story. But
I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit of that during this talk, actually.
The last thing you want to do is years later, your kids say, "You lie to us. You told us this." I didn't want any of that comeback.
But I didn't lie.
These days, they find it my political views and my views on the larger picture. I mean, not only what's happening to us as a population in our own country, but why and how that relates to the rest of the world, etc. So they're always amused by whenever I refer to someone from the left as a commo or a communist, because that's such an extreme thing, right? So.
Yeah.
And they know my background. I grew up in a Labor household. I grew up in a unionised family. My grandfather and two of his sons, not my biological father, but two of his other sons. Yep. And indeed, my younger brother, who's rest in peace, he was unionised for years. But I drifted away from the Labor, having been brought up as like a working class in a poor area, blah, blah, blah. I grew up in Melbourne in a place called Pascoe Vale, and that's sort of pretty easy. That's pretty well documented. But I drifted away from the left politics, and I spent years in the middle.
Yeah.
And the more that I spent there, and I was looking at both sides, and I suppose I was in a sense having two, each way, or I was sitting on the fence. I don't know, but
yeah,
I woke up one day and found that I drifted very, very much to the right.
Easy enough done in this day and age. Now, for all the guys who are just tuning in, before we actually get into the nitty gritty of it, as always, we do have a bit of a caveat, a bit of a trigger warning. So some of the content that we do discuss here, some people may find it disturbing. They may find that it triggers some issues with themselves. If that is the case, obviously nobody's twisting your arm and forcing you to stay here and listen. But if you do get triggered, take the time to ask yourself, what is it that is actually triggering you and what can you do to help that situation? Don't just let it get the better of you. Take the time to analyze it and work out what it is that's triggering you and what you can do to work on that. So many people know, you as the front man of Rose Tattoo. They know you as, the bad boy of rock. You're known for your political affiliations, but I would argue that very few people know Gary Anderson, the man behind Angry Anderson. And that's sort of what we're going to be covering off on today. So you did mention that you grew up down in Melbourne. You actually had quite a very challenging upbringing. Is that correct?
Define challenging. I mean, I had a difficult childhood. My mother's Mauritian, and my father met her. My biological father, Colin, was a jockey, and he was holidaying.
That's where you get your height from?
Yeah, really.
From?
Well, mum's even shorter. She was, I think she reached 4'10" or 4'11". That was her maximum. But yeah, they married in Mauritius, and he brought her home, and she's dark, um, doesn't speak English. She's fiercely Roman Catholic, and introduced her to his father and
Yep.
and his mother and his siblings, and his father and other male members of the family were Masons. So they rejected her from day one because of all those.
Yep.
She was foreign, she didn't speak much English. She was dark, and and we lived for the first 6 years of my life. Once she birthed me in my grandparents' home, and my mother and I were largely rejected by the head of the family, my grandfather. And he, from what I've learnt from other relatives, he did not like mum associating with the rest of the family. He was ashamed, embarrassed, etc., etc. In fact, I was told a story only less than 10 years ago, by an aunt that was rapidly becoming very aged and the onset of dementia. And she said a story I should have told you as a young man. She said, your father was told by his father that when my mother birthed me and I was able to travel, because all travel in those days, or most travel, was by ship.
Yeah.
That he was to send my mother and myself home and dissolve the marriage. So suffice to say, that was I would have, in therapy, I've dealt with the fact that children absorb what goes on around them, even at an extremely young age, which is something that we've learnt and we have to take notice of and like alter our behaviour, if you like, when we've got very young children, because there was, up until sort of 30 years ago, largely held belief that the children up until they were 3 or 4 or 5 years old were sort of oblivious. Well, they're not.
No, they're
so I would have been aware of this isolation. I would have been aware of the bad vibes, so to speak. At around about the same age, about 5 or 6, of course, I was victimised by a pedophile.
Yep.
So that happened, and not long after that, or we figure, try to put a time frame together. Around about 6 years old, we moved out of my grandparents' home, and Colin built a house in an emerging suburb, which was Pascoe Vale, part of Coburg.
Yep.
In the northern parts of the, because I remember when we first went there, we lived in a caravan for at least a year.
Yeah.
And they built the house, and I remember making friends with kids in the street, and the house next door was already built, and they were a very large family, and they were very good to mum, and because Colin was away a lot.
Yeah.
Which was good, because he was an extremely violent man, and violent towards her and myself, but more emotionally violent towards me. Like he really, he made it very difficult for me to even have any sort of relationship with him. But he wasn't prepared to have a loving relationship with myself. Anyway, 10 years later, my brother was born, and they were able to form a far better relationship than I actually had with Colin, my biological. But
was that like a kick in the guts after everything you'd already, by that point you'd already been a victim of sexual violence, a victim of physical violence, a victim of emotional abuse? Was that
neglect?
That like a massive kick in the guts to have a brother coming along and then have them connect straight out the gate, the connection that you obviously were never given?
You are the first person, apart from the therapist and a woman in my life that's been in my life in the most recent years.
Yeah.
To actually be able to articulate that as a sight in to the person. And yeah, I remember Mum told me the story. We laughed about it for years and years, but she told me the story that she brought my like Mum's missing for a few days, or she's in hospital having a baby. that explains, you know, because 10 years younger than I, so he was born when I'm about 10.
Yep.
I'm just sort of beginning, you know, like the belly, you know, the changes that were being made. And so anyway, he arrives home with mum, and, you know, I'm not allowed to go into the room because the baby's asleep.
Yep.
Mum spends a lot of time with the baby, blah, blah, blah. So there's no sort of giving me some place soft to fall, like,
Yeah.
because parents didn't know about that stuff in those days. Plus the fact I didn't have a loving relationship with my father. Now, when our first was born, Roxanne, she was 5 years old when Galen arrived, and you know, I was well prepared and as well educated as I possibly could be for that occasion. So I doted on her, and she didn't the transition for her was like she focused on her younger brother. So there was all this outpouring of love from her and her mother and I. But you know, we still bathed. I still helped her get ready for school.
Yeah.
You know, we still went for walks in the park. We walked the dogs together. You know, those kind of things. So she wasn't neglected or pushed to one side. Anyway, getting back to the story, Mum tells this great. Well, I've lost my mother to dementia, but she told this great story and took such great light. She said, one day I wondered where you were. And she said, and all of a sudden you've appeared with a port in hand and dressed in your my Sunday go to meeting clothes. And like, righto, I'm ready to go. You don't want me anymore. So, you know, I'm ready to go. And Mum said, and she had the wisdom, as mothers do. And she sat down and she said, all right, let's just talk about this. And she said, why are you going? And I said, well, you know, you got a new baby and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it was then that she realised that, you know, that she had been neglecting me, but, you know, because it's only natural to spend so much time with the new baby.
Yeah.
So then I started to be included in bath time. She taught me how to change his nappy, how to prepare his bottle, you know, put it in a saucepan with water and heat it up. And so I got included. So she rescued me from what could have been an otherwise very traumatic situation.
Another isolation. Yeah.
But I'd already come to the point where I thought, I'm not wanted, I'm not needed. There's the new version. It's getting all attention, right? So I couldn't form a bonding relationship until my mother quite wisely included me in the, you know, the process of looking after this new that I soon learned affectionately. This is my brother. You know, he's so yeah, and it's very illuminating because it was quite traumatic to and of course you don't realise these things, or you do realise these things until much later. And there's been several periods of my life where, like when I was like, you know, considered a vagrant and I was, you know, partially living on the streets, etc. I was sent to a facility once for a 76-hour assessment, and I was diagnosed, and it was because of my vagrancy, you know, because I was sleeping rough. And when I was picked up, you know, I was drunk. And the police sort of said, well, where do you live? And I said, well, you know, I've left home, blah, 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 which in those days was fairly unusual. So they did the right thing, the coppers. They took me to the Salvos and it looked after me, you know. And but you know, part of it was because I'd been arrested, if you like, for vagrancy. The stipulation was I had to do 76 hours of observation, and I was diagnosed then as a massive or manic depressive. And of course, then the psych people at this facility wanted to know my background, etc., etc. Anyway, suffice to say, they took me home. Mum was so happy to see me. And it was, you know, very much a tearful reunion. But that, you know, that was in my teenage years.
Yeah.
But, so anyway, during years and years, I've sort of been in and out of therapy, or I've had experiences with therapy. But leading up to 2000, from 96 to I went away. I did a trek for television across Kokoda, and that just the Kokoda experience is so traumatic, physically, emotionally, spiritually. I don't think there's an intellect involved, but intellectualize the process.
Everything?
Yeah,
You just found the lid just came off everything?
Oh, mate, it was like, and that's why I recommend the experience for anyone that's suffered trauma, because it worked for me. So it'd be like if I found a new wonder drug, I'd say, well, try this too. But, and I've had a lot of, my motorcycle club is the veterans. Used to be Vietnam veterans, and now we're just veterans.
Yeah.
And so many of members my age have done Kokoda.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of young veterans that either aren't serving anymore or are still serving. And they are either going to do it or they've done it. And it's a way of, because what it does, it physically reduces you to the lowest level, like the lowest, that you can go. So it rips you apart physically. And it destroys you mentally, stroke emotionally. And the wisdom of that is that when you reach rock bottom, you've got somewhere to stand. Why do you think they call it rock bottom?
I like that. When you hit the
right,
bottom.
see? So it's somewhere firm and solid to stand. That's the way my interpretation. I think that's why the saying came into being. Me thinking about, well, rock bottom. You hit rock bottom. You can't go any further.
Yeah.
So you stand up on this firm foundation, but then you can rebuild.
Yeah.
And that's the point, every time whatever it is in your life knocks you down, it does that because the wisdom of the divine is such that you have to be knocked down so you can get up.
Yeah.
Because you can't get up if you're already up.
Yeah. It's like there's no growth without discomfort. You need to experience discomfort to actually grow as a human being, to grow as a leader, to grow in any capacity. There's an element of discomfort. If you never leave your comfort zone, you never change. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I remember all my sons, well, both my sons now, the remaining, but the three of them were all they had common things in music, obviously. One of the things they've always had, which they've inherited from me, apart from the music, is a fascination with the military. And they've grown up with my association, with my club and friends, right? And a lot of my close mates are in the club, or bikers, right? Yeah. And so a lot of one percenters, which I've got a lot of friends that are one percenters, and they're ex-military as well.
Yep.
But they've got they've got a fascination for all things military. And I remember watching this movie years ago, which I then said to them, "Well, watch this." And it was like one of those sort of Marky Mark sort of type things, but they were SEALs.
Yep. Lone Survivor?
It may have been, actually. It may have been.
Story. He was
there's a part where they're in field, engaged, but they have flashbacks to training.
Yeah.
And, like 300 of these blokes and 60 survive, right, out of 300, which is like any special forces. Which is why there's not too many women in special forces, but let's not get into that. But the thing about it is,
worms. Don't do this to me.
No, exactly, no. But there would be the odd female that had enough grit, and testicular fortitude, spiritually to do it. But anyway, during this flashbacks, they're laying in the water and they're doing all the stuff that they do, and that's what that's the wisdom in that training, is to reduce you to that level where you've got nothing left. Then you have to find something. And it's the person that finds that, they're the ones that get the badge. Because
absolutely.
Remember there was a movie about the spacecraft being used called The Right Stuff.
Yep.
And it was the same thing. It was about astronauts. So when you want the best out of yourself, the time to find that, because life never gives without taking, never takes without giving. It's the wisdom of the divine, you know, the creational process. So once you've lost something or something's taken from you, it's not all about loss. And what you have to do is you have to find, and it's there. And the amazing thing about it is that we're all imbued, we all have the same capacity as everybody else. So there's not one person created that doesn't have the stuff to do it. Now, physically and mentally, when people, you know, in their SEAL training or whatever, when they break down, that's not their moment.
Yeah.
Their moment in that moment is not to have found that within themselves. You see, well, because of the special ops thing, this is going back to the military thing, they can't have that person who hasn't found that yet or doesn't find it during the training.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they never will.
Yeah.
You know, it's like people that deal with depression, and I do a lot of public speaking, mainly about surviving the experience, because my survival is fairly well documented. My journey of survival. And I get asked to do a lot of public speaking about that, particularly about like dealing with depression. And one way or another, and I never knew this as a child, I had been dealing with depression since I was, as you say, it's difficult for me to say, use the word attacked, but I was attacked. But when I lost my innocence, if you like, when I lost my childhood, and even a healthy growth through adolescence and young manhood, because it's all twisted and distorted.
Yeah.
You know, your sexuality is twisted and distorted. Your appreciation of love and tenderness, and you know, that's all been brutalized to the point where, you know, you're left pretty much not believing in these concepts. And the saving grace, of course, and I've said this, you know, ad nauseum over the years, was Mum, because she never swayed, she never wavered or swayed in her affection and unconditional love. So, and I didn't learn to appreciate that until I was a grown man.
Yeah. Now, you were saying before about every time life takes something away, it gives you something else. That it's a back and forth. And that actually works. We were discussing this the other day when we jumped on the phone for our first chat. And we're talking about music as an art form and art being an expression of pain. So obviously you had your innocence taken from a very young age, but from the hardships that you faced from a young age, they fed into your creativity and music being a creative outlet and an artistic channel for you. So all your early life, you experienced pain and you experienced hardship, and that obviously led into, you know, a troubled adolescence. But then that fed into, obviously, Angry Anderson, Rose Tattoo. You found a creative outlet inside of music. Tell us a little bit about that transition from the child that you were and the adolescent that you were and the troubles you were going through then into Rose Tattoo and finding music.
When I do public speaking, I usually start out by saying, thank you, you know, my name is Angry Anderson, but I've already been introduced as Angry. I said, you know, like a good place to start is possibly like one of the most asked questions of myself over the years since the early 70s when I became nicknamed Angry.
Yeah.
How do you get the nickname Angry? Why wasn't it, you know, something else? Like what, you know, why wasn't it, well, at school it was Mouse because I was, you know, there was nothing of me and I was just little. But when I joined the Vigilantes in my late teens, early 20s, which was an outlaw motorcycle, they couldn't have anybody in the ranks called Mouse, so I got nicknamed Rat.
Okay.
But that was temporary as well. But anyway, that's another story. But you know, and that's what happens. And I'm glad you mentioned adolescence because it's another key moment in your life, even though it lasts 2 or 3 years. But puberty transforms a human being from one thing to another, and it's a transitional period. So it can't just happen overnight. It's a gradual moving into and a gradual moving out of. And that such is the gentle way that nature or the creational process wants to take you on a journey. So nothing happens just like that, except the things that happen in our life, like loss. Your father dies, or your mother dies, or you lose a child, whatever. And they're sort of shocks at moments, right? So they're trauma moments. But with adolescence, and I learnt this in therapy, and I completely endorse therapy for anyone that wants to have a go at it. And you can make it work for yourself as long as you're honest.
Yes.
That's the key thing. You have to be honest, and you have to trust. You have to trust this person. But during adolescence, I could have gone either way, right? I could have withdrawn further in and gone and kept seeking darker and darker places, which is, it's kind of like the abused person syndrome. But typically abused woman, she keeps ending up with the same kind of person. You're like, who abuses her? And she goes, why is every bloke that I meet abuse me? Well, because you look for that. I mean, it's a tragic thing to have to understand, but it's a true dynamic within the psychology of, like when you go into psychotherapy, you explore these things. And we do, us repetitive offenders, so to speak, we keep looking for the same person, hoping we'll get a different result. Okay, sooner or later, you break the cycle.
Yep.
But anyway, getting back to adolescence, the thing is that I could have become darker and darker and darker, or I could have done what I did do. Now, I was taught violence by Colin, physical violence. I watched him treat my mother to physical violence and abuse. And it made me, apart from the other things that happened, I was a sad child, a very, really, inwardly, the sadness was in there, as most of us try to deal with it. And nature helps us deal with it, shut it down.
Yep.
The reason I know that repressed memory syndrome is real is because I suffered from it. I probably do to a degree still, but I did greatly until I broke away from it. But during adolescence, I could have become sadder, but the transformation for me worked because it made me demonstratively angry. So I had a rage in me that came out through music. And that's good, because otherwise it could have just manifested itself only in a physical sense, or I would have become an emotional abuser like Colin, as well as a physical abuser. But I didn't. So I used my rage and I fueled that into music, and I became known long before I was Angry Anderson. I became known in musical circles as being I've always been a very physical performer.
Yeah. The first time I actually
you
saw you was at your 50th birthday bash. It was Newcastle Workers Club. I think it might have been 99, and you're playing with the Angels and the Screaming Jets, 3 of us in one night at Newcastle Workers Club. I'm pretty sure it was like your 50th birthday or something like that. It's going back a bit.
yeah, really.
Yeah, and then I saw you again. You were the opener for Motorhead on their last Australian tour as well with Airborne. There was Airborne and Motorhead. That was the second time I saw you.
Yeah.
I remember you looked pretty spent at the end of that, actually.
I just, the thing about, in the old days, we used to fuel ourselves with alcohol and a lot of chemicals.
Yeah.
But these days you can't allow that because, it interferes with the process. And I remember, like, to illustrate, I remember the band got back together again, and we'd been playing for a couple of weeks, and we're always, this is like, after the Guns N' Roses first tour.
Yeah.
So it would have been in the early 90s. And I remember sitting in a room one late, drinking with Pete. And I said, it's going great, isn't it? He said, yeah. He said, I'm having the best fun. This is the best fun we've had with the band, And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, because we're all pretty much sober compared to what we used to be like.
Yeah, okay.
And he said, I can remember everything. I can remember every gig. And he And that started to dawn on me in those days too. And that was part of the sobriety thing, was that you actually were living in the moment. And what I didn't realize when I was addicted to alcohol and drugs, that it denied me, it anesthetized me from pain, which is the reason that, most of us get into that sort of thing. But there was a price to pay. And when my daughter was born and I had to give up drugs and alcohol and bad behavior, it allowed me to find that, well, I can do this anyway.
Yeah.
I don't have to have, a big head full of speed or Coke or whatever. I don't have to, drink a bottle of spirits. And there was no willingness to sort of like live up to the legend, if you like, or live up to the, people used to, like they say, people go to rock gigs to see who's going to survive. I remember, no, it's true. Like in the old days, people, I remember Pete saying to me, he said, people come to see if you're actually going to survive the experience. And this is, when I was sort of in the latter years when I was arguably at my worst. And these days, I get the same vibe, the same kick, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't keep doing it. But I get to the end of the gig and I'm in the same physical state that I used to be in the early days, but because it was the ravages of alcohol and drugs. Yeah. Now it's just pure, it's a commitment to 100% energy. And I've got an hour and a half to explain my whole life, if you like.
Yeah.
Every night of the week. Like when we were on tour, like overseas, we play every night, apart from maybe one night a week off, sometimes two, but no more than that. And so you've got to, because you have to make every performance count, because it may be your last.
Yeah.
Because there's no such thing as a promise of tomorrow. There's a dream of tomorrow, but there's no promise. Life doesn't say, I guarantee you this. Guarantees you nothing.
I think.
And you think about.
Sorry, keep going.
Well, if you get up the next day, that's another gift. That's another chance to live the best you can, do the best you can. But there's no guarantee you're going to have that. So every time we perform, it's not present in your mind like, oh, this could be the last gig. But that's spiritually, I know that's how we go on stage.
Treat every show like it's your last.
Because if this is going to be the last, people are going to remember it.
I think, especially given recent circumstances inside of your life, I think that, do you think that, so for people who don't know, obviously you lost one of your children, was it 2 years ago now?
No, just over a year. Well, it'll be a year. It'll be 2 years in November.
2 years in November.
Yeah.
So I think that's a prime example of exactly what you're saying with regards to, no promise of tomorrow. With everything that you've been through in your life, with, the childhood, with the battles with drugs, the battles with alcohol, people might not know.
Behavior.
The bad behavior, all the bad behavior. You've got your life, together to a point where you're living clean, you're living, for your family, and then a tragedy like that just comes out of left field. How did that? I can't even, I'm a father of three myself, so I can't even fathom how anyone copes with that. And especially, being as recent as it is, how do you get through that on a day-to-day basis?
Denial.
Denial?
I'm very, very fond of saying that the denial's not a river in Egypt. I didn't think of that. I just borrowed it. In all honesty, and the only time that I've actually spoken about it publicly is when my daughter and I went and did Denton.
Yep.
I'm only dealing with what I have to at the moment, and apparently, according to all the experts, and some of them are parents that have lost children, particularly to violence, homicide. I mean, whether you lose a kid in a car crash or a drug overdose or a surfing accident or drowning or whatever. But to in an individual's case, and this is what we all understand as parents, the manner in which they die can't actually, or taken, as we say, it's a softer way of putting it. That's a personal thing too. Loss is loss. Someone's pain can't be measured more or less than somebody else's, because that would be condescending in a sense. It would be, so a person's pain is a person's pain, but there's no denying the circumstances. You have to deal with that, and I haven't. And I when I say I refuse to, I choose not to until the whole legal process is over and dealt with. But I have not asked for, and I have told my children and my friends, if you know things about how he was killed, I know the bare necessities. That's all I want to know.
Yeah.
Now, I could ask for more detail, but I couldn't deal with that as yet. I'm still finding that thing that's going to help me deal with this, knowing that, of course, I'll be dealing with this for the rest of my life. And but again, going back to depression, I've dealt with depression most of my life since I was 5 or 6 years old. So I know that it can be done, but at least I'm aware of my own capacity at the moment to know that, I'm not dealing with it as well as I can or could, but I can't at the moment. But I know that I will build as time goes by, because nothing's going to change that. It's like, I've had well-meaning friends say to me, he should get 30 years. Well, he should be, incarcerated, if you like, put in jail for the rest of his life. But having said that, that's not going to bring Liam back. It's not going to change the grief. It doesn't matter whether he gets 3 years or 300.
Yeah.
So anyway, myself and the children, his brothers and sister and his mum, and, the relatives as they go out.
Because you have a very tight-knit family, because you were a single dad for a very long time, and you have a very tight-knit family as well, don't you?
Yeah, the kids were extremely, and are, but right up until the four of them were, yeah. I mean, I don't imagine that, all siblings. My brother and I had a loving relationship, but we were never able to bond. Like, I adored him. I loved him, but because we got off to that less than ideal start, because Colin did favour him, and he was his golden-haired boy, and he was nothing like my mother in appearance, which is something I think plays a part.
Yep.
But yeah, it was a different relationship. And then when Colin abandoned us altogether, I was left to father my younger brother, and which I did. And I mean, I remember I went to Coburg Tech, right, as a secondary school, and my brother followed, years later, and I remember I took him. When it was father and son night,
yeah,
he had no one, so
you took him yourself.
His older brother, and I've turned up with him, and of course I knew most of the teachers because they taught me.
Yeah.
And
have they recovered from teaching you yet, or are they still traumatized?
I don't know, and I have made my apologies. Because, but I wasn't as demonstratively troublesome as some boys in our school. because, Pasco Vale was a pretty tough place to grow up in. And so there was lots of gangs in the school, and a lot of the leaders of the gangs were from known families that, like one of my best mates at school, his family, his father drove long distance semis.
Yep.
So I've loved big trucks since a very, very early age. But he also had a tow truck company. And his two sons, the two elder sons, drove trucks for him. I made a real good mate, which is what happens with the little blokes a lot, is that they gravitate towards, or even bigger blokes that become protective. So yeah. one of my best mates, now he was, because he came from this really rough family, and they were known, like, in the area to be like, oh, you've got to stay away from them because they're, they're pretty. I mean, he's a tow truck driver, there was, tow truck wars in Melbourne were famous for years. And, I mean, people were shot, killed, and a lot of guys were, had their trucks burnt, and all this kind of shit was going on when I was a teenager. So, anyway, there was guys like him that were notorious in the school for, being so they took the attention away from the kids that were dysfunctional, but really didn't sort of like pop up on the radar that often. I mean, my absenteeism was put down to the fact that I was bronchial as a kid. Yeah. So I was allowed to take extended, like 2 weeks, off every now and again. And, just say, well, I had a bout. I mean, I had pneumonia twice. I mean, I was always, every winter, I was, I got bronchitis and pleurisy. Yeah. And I was pretty sickly in that way, which is, see, again, it's one of the things that Colin did for me. He taught me to swim because the doctor said, well, he should learn to swim, so they help his asthma. Yeah. And so, like, in other words, he was doing the right thing in a sense. But so, I learned to swim, but I learned to, try and deal with this yearly occurrence of being crook. So anyway, what I'm saying is that I was able to take periods of time off school where I'd just go and, spend days in the park, like whatever. So, I wasn't on the top 10 list of the worst behaved blokes at the school. But then again,
that came later.
It came out later. Yeah, exactly. But at Coburg Tech, there was, and I've run into a few of them over the years. Blokes just walk up to me at a meeting where I'm talking, or at a gig, and say, "G'day, I'm blah blah," and I recognise the name, and I just think, I said, "How did you end up?" They go, "Oh, well, I went in the army and blah, blah." That straightened me out and blah, blah, blah. Or a couple of them actually went into the police force. So,
you became a rock star.
Yeah. That was the point, There was, when I left school, I did a apprenticeship as a fitter and turner. And after the first couple of years, I saved enough money to buy a motorcycle, and I bought a motorcycle, and I wanted to become, Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
And that didn't work out for me because, at the end of the day, nobody likes to get beat up that often.
You're not wrong. So, mate, childhood abuse, rough adolescence, trying to find yourself inside of that. You've lost most of your bandmates, original bandmates, to cancer at some point or another. You've lost your son. Yet inside of all of that, not only are you still standing, not only are you still, standing here saying that you're a stronger person for everything that's happened, you're still giving back as well. Like, you're recognised in the Australian community as a man who, and you've actually been publicly recognised for your service to Australia and the things that you've done for, in particular, the Australian youth. Do you find that giving back as much as you do, that's a way for you to sort of balance your history?
Yeah, I've come to grips with the wisdom of it in, you know, like when I say in my adulthood. So somewhere in my, like between my 30s and 40s, and God, that's a long time ago. Yeah, well, you know, I'm in my early 70s now. I'm 72. So it was a thing I was taught by my mum, and I didn't realise in those days, as most kids don't.
As in to give back? You were taught by your mum to give back?
Yeah, mum. So mum was, you know, devoutly Christian.
Yep.
And she was always, and as bad as I thought she had it, and I'm, you know, I was witness to it. As bad as I thought she had it, she never became a victim. She didn't allow herself the victim mentality. She always used to say, it's part of God's plan, which to this day I don't understand, because I don't understand her view of the fact that it was God's plan, right? So she saw her God as like, well, you know, for some reason I've got to suffer. Well, no, it's not about that, Mum. It's just, that's life, right? It's got nothing to do with God. It's just life.
Yep.
Life's meant to be hard, to teach you to be strong. And that's God's wisdom. But God's not a judgmental being. It just is you know, it is. You know, God is.
I'm actually going to steal that quote. Life's meant to be hard to make you strong. I'm stealing that.
Well, you know, it's a wisdom that sort of appeared to me one night. You know, like, you know, I'm just saying, it's in a dream. But yeah, I mean, when I've questioned over my life, why me? And I think, well, the only logical answer I can come up with is like, if that stuff happened to me that made me angry, and I am now angry Anderson, then okay, I couldn't have got this way any other way. So that's the explanation for that, right?
Nailed it.
And the reason that life keeps challenging me, as it does all of us, is because life wants me to be strong. Life wants me to be a better man. Life wants me to be a better father, a better partner, a better, you know, like if I hadn't seen that violence, well, you see, I could have gone the way some blokes do, as they follow suit.
Yep.
Or I could have done what I must have done sometime when I was very young, made a conscious decision like, this is not right. This is wrong, what's happening to my mother. So I'm never going to repeat that, because, you know, I've never been violent towards women, never would be. So the thing about it is, I think, you know, at the end of the day, and I do say this when I do public speaking, am I unhappy with who I am? No. I'm very happy with who I am. I'm very happy about the way that, you know, every day for me is a struggle. And I'm not looking for sympathy. It's just a pure fact.
Yep.
My marriage was a struggle. Me being a father has always been a struggle. The boys live here. And I was grateful for the fact that, you know, up until we lost Liam, I had the three of them here for a couple of years. And they were all, the great part of that experience was that as their father, I was able to see them as men. I'd raised them from babies into adolescence, you know, and then there was a period where, like, you can't live like that in my house, in your home. So if you have so much disrespect, you go and make your own way. And as harsh as that may be, that's what I believe, right? So
I agree 100%.
Tough medicine. Like, so you can't not work, you can't sit at home and smoke and take fucking drugs and just be a shithead and talk to me badly.
Yeah.
There's no respect here. So go make your own, go and make some mistakes and then come back in some, and they all did. And suffice to say,
wiser for it.
Like I said, that last couple of years, I had the three of them here, and we were able to talk about all this stuff because they were grown now.
More like
and they were men.
you find it?
Yeah, they were young men.
Yeah.
You know, and they were experiencing what it was like to intellectualize the process, but live the process. And, and I'd always brought them up to believe in the spiritual aspects of life, or of the person, the being. And so they were starting to value that then. And it was amazing to, now that, of course, that we've got to, well, we've all got to, as a family, deal with losing Liam. That's that's a process we're dealing with together.
You feel it's made
So
do you feel it's made you stronger as a family, that through tragedy?
Everything we've gone through as a family has made us stronger. And it's like Roxy, like through her own, their mum, the children's mother, is she's a deeply troubled person, deeply damaged as a child. In fact, what she went through, no young woman should go through, no young child should go through. So the fact that she struggled, a lot of the role of mothering went to Roxy.
Yeah.
And that's how Roxy and the three boys become, like I say, the hardship they endured as siblings made them fiercely loyal to the people that I know that have got wonderful relationships with their kids. And they'll be at our place at a barbecue and they go, Jesus, your kids are tight. Jesus, your kids are so solid, aren't they? And their kids aren't lacking that. But their kids haven't had to have gone through what my kids have gone through. So other parents are actually seeing a depth, if you like, or a breadth of something. It's not lacking in their children. They're lacking, their children are loving, they're good kids, they've done well at school, and they've had seemingly not trouble. No one has a trouble-free life, but they haven't done, their kids haven't done as hard as my kids. So it hasn't, I think what I'm trying to say is that it's given them a toughness, but it hasn't made them hard.
Yeah, okay.
Not hard in the sense, I've known some hard guys in my life.
Yeah. They're not jaded and bitter at life. They've just learned from the hardship that they've faced and grown from them. Yeah.
And it's given them a resilience and a strength.
Awesome.
Which as a dad, when we're sitting around at barbecues and, they're all interacting with one another and my friends and their friends. And I just sit back and think, they're doing real good. They're doing real good.
And you know who that's a credit to, don't you? You got to own it, mate. You got to own it.
Hey, I take some credit. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Awesome.
But they have so supported me in this last year and a bit. Yeah, they've got me through to this point, and they're there. They're rock solid. I'd say.
So even in the
it's made it bearable.
Lucky man.
It's made it bearable.
Yeah.
And it's at the moment, and I really can't talk about it anymore. But
no, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm just bearing up, which means it's bearable. It's just bearable.
Yeah.
So I know that the worst time is to come, and I'm trying as best I can to prepare for it.
Yep.
Anyway.
Mate, what we're going to do is, before we wrap it up...
We're not going to talk about coronavirus?
Fuck Corona.
Another day.
No, I'm done with Corona. Fuck Corona.
Really? Yeah, I'm a bit over it as well. But
well, you've been in quarantine for 14 days. So for those who don't know, Angry just got back from half a tour in Europe before it got cut short, and he's had to be in self-isolation and quarantine for the last 14 days.
Yeah, actually, well, we got back on the 18th. Now, strictly speaking, you can't can't count the day you get back, so it starts from the next day. And so it was only last week. I've only been like, and it was really weird. I would say it was really weird because I actually walked to the top of the driveway, and up until then, for the 2 weeks, I'd walk up there and I'd step over the boundary, which you're not supposed to do, but the post box just outside so I'd get the mail and come back down. And if the dogs, you know, it was so funny, you know, like one morning I walked up there and I said to the dogs, I walked out the back and walked up the sideway through the garden. And so the dogs were out there, right? My old dog, Boof, and my bitch, Rosie. And I don't know why they didn't twig, because I didn't put the harnesses and get the leads out.
Yeah.
But I just opened the gate and they followed me up the driveway, right? We get up to the driveway and they both walked to the top of the driveway and I'm starting to walk back. And I could tell, and I turned around, I said, come on, let's go.
Like,
and they both looked at me, and they actually looked at one another, and I was like, what the fuck is he doing? He's kind of like,
this isn't a walk.
Aren't we going for a walk? Yeah. And it was like, so it's been a real breakthrough, being able to walk the dogs again. And
little luxuries, eh?
But just going out and getting the car, and that was only 2 weeks, you know. It's like, but yeah, it's all good. We're all, you know, everyone in the band is fine.
Awesome.
No problem. So yeah, I was about to say life goes on is normal, but you know what? Define the new normal.
Anymore.
Yeah, really. I you know, I don't want to, you know, like you said, you don't want to go into it, but like,
Kenny Rogers had the right idea, mate. He knew when to fold them.
Well, he certainly did, and he wrote about it prophetically many years ago. But I think
I'm out of here.
I think one of the things that we've got to adjust to, and it's another thing we've got to deal with, is well, okay, I don't think things are going to be as bad as some people suggest they may be, but it's a different ball game now.
It really is.
You know, yeah. So that again, something's been forced on us, and this will be the telling. You know, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, the real ugly part of it, where, you know, people have done really ugly things to one another, to other people. Oh yeah, but it's all about the corona. Yeah, don't make excuses.
Yeah,
you know, ugly is as ugly does.
Yeah. Just a bogan fighting over toilet paper. That's the end of it.
Well, yeah, but yeah, exactly. I mean, and doing things like, you know, like I remember saying to my son the other day, I said, you know, because this is only my second time outside the house in 2 weeks, and I said, geez, I hope we don't come across anything like that. I said, because if I saw, let alone if someone spat on me,
yeah,
male or female, right, I'd just knock them to the ground. But because you don't take a liberty like that.
Yeah.
You just don't do that, right? But if I saw someone doing that, like I've seen stuff on Facebook, you know, and people are filming it, but not doing anything about it.
Anything to stop it. Yeah.
And I'm not like that. I couldn't stand by and watch someone treat someone badly like that.
Yeah.
I'd have to step in and go like, nah, that's wrong.
Angry would come out.
Angry is just bubbling right below the surface. and that's another thing too. It's like the recovering alcoholic, you know, you're never free of it. You're never free of it. Every now and again, it's kind of like, you know, it's like dealing with the black dog. It's like every now and again something happens, and I'm just about to pull the trigger, or the trigger's about to be pulled, and sometimes, to give myself credit, it goes right to there, and I'm just about to, and I go, whoa, and I'll pull it up.
Get a hold of it. Yeah.
Because the secret, and it's the same secret dealing with depression and anxiety, which are two entirely different things. But dealing with, you know, a mental disorder, an emotional stroke mental disorder, and depression and anxiety are manifestations of those. You know, the individual, and this is where you have to do this, brothers and sisters, you have to realise that you are the only one that can control that situation. And if you don't step in to control it, nobody else. I can modify your behaviour if you behave badly.
You should come and work for us, mate. You could be one of our coaches. That's exactly where we start with it. Nobody's coming to save you. You got to do it yourself.
And the thing it is, and I will not say, and I will not, I know that I've probably put a few people off, particularly when I've talked at schools. And I said that, the worst thing that you can allow yourself to believe is, there's nothing I can do about it.
I'm a victim.
Yes, there is. And like when I got bullied at school, and I was bullied because the reputation everyone knew about my father, and he was a lunatic and a violent man, and they all thought that he was mentally insane, which he turned out to be, but that's another story. But so I got bullied for that. I got bullied for being a little, kind of thing, the fact that my mother was dark, whatever. And so, one of the great things about going to Coburg Tech, if the bullying became physical, the teachers would grab the two antagonists, take them into the gym, put the boxing gloves on them and say, righto, we're going to like 3 1-minute rounds or whatever. And whoever came out, and then you took the gloves off, you shook hands, you go, righto, no more of this. And 9 times out of 10, it stopped there.
Yeah.
And, but in those days, we were taught, if you like, or encouraged, don't cop bullying, because you only get bullied because you allow it to happen. Now, you may face up to the bully and you may get snotted, but he's learnt you're not going to just get walked over.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to stand up to him. Right. So, and I remember, again, a big mate of mine, he took on a bully for me because I'd copped a couple of hidings because I wouldn't put up with this bullying. And this bloke was bigger than me and he got it over me. So a bigger mate of mine they were playing handball actually, and he chose to, let this escalate into a physical, and then he gave this guy a hell of a hide. And while he was picking him up off the ground, he said, "That's for the mouse, that's for." He said, "So don't, So and the guy dropped off. But what I mean is, it was a different mindset. We were taught to deal with life in a reality sense. We didn't go to a quiet space or a safe space and sit down and discuss it and, blah, blah, blah. We were allowed, and I use that word advisedly, we were allowed to work it out, the way kids should be able to. I mean, I don't prescribe to these days. I mean, kids carry knives to school, so it's a different ball game.
Yeah.
But the attitude was, that you have to deal with life. Yeah. You can't protect yourself from it. You can't shelter yourself from it. And we shouldn't be doing that with kids in school, just because they're suffering anxiety and or depression, which I said are two entirely different things. Then we must encourage them not to take shelter in their weakness, but to find their strength. Yes. In other words, we can't allow them to believe that they can't beat this. We've got to say, within you is an angry. No, I don't mean it. In you is an angry, strong person. Like a person who can get angry over the injustice of what you might be doing. And the thing is, just like, you can't blame kids for being confused about these things because they're fed so much negativity. So if you grow with what you're fed. Yeah. So if you're fed negativity, you grow negatively.
Social media's got to start to play in that.
Exactly. If you reinforce, now where I went to school, teachers were always pushing us, play sport, go to the gym, do this, do that. But it was male, very masculine. And it was, and they were trying to get us to discover our strengths. Yeah. I love playing football, right? And I remember at the end of second term, second year, I said to my football coach, I'm not going to play next year. And he said, why? And I said, because everyone's getting bigger and I'm getting knocked, flat. And, Team A had played Team B, right? And then we played competition with the schools, other schools. And I said, because I used to play rover, or sometimes I played full forward and sometimes other positions, but mainly rover. And, they'd target me. And he said, well, you just got to find that you're tougher. He said, so if they knock you down, just get up.
Yep.
He said, and after a while, well, get sick of knocking you down. That part wasn't actually true.
I was waiting for a big dramatic moment there. You're like, you know what? It fucking worked. But
yeah, really. No, it worked because I kept getting up.
Yep. Knocked down 7 times, stand up 8.
I got up every time. They never got tired of knocking me down. That's the part that wasn't true.
Kept going, 100%.
But I remember Colin was he's a jockey, and one of the things that he did, because jockeys need upper body strength, right, to hold a horse, or some of the big horses that he rode were big horses. So he was an amateur boxer. He had amateur fights. So he was very, very good with his fists, and he had a violence in him, which was, and that's for another day, but that was beaten into him by his father. His father was a terrible, terrible man.
Generational.
Yeah. And he was a violent, violent man, and he was bad. He was a bad guy, a bad man. If there's one, I don't think there's two. It's like the old saying, there's no such thing as a truly bad boy. Well, I think if you're allowed to, get to manhood and you still have that, you can probably turn into a bad man. I've known a couple.
Yeah.
And Jack was one of them. In latter years, I learned to understand Colin. I don't know if I ever quite forgave him, but, I let it go.
Did you ever find a level of peace at any point in time?
Oh yeah, for many, many years as a youngster, I plotted his death. I was waiting until I got old enough, because that's another thing he taught me too. He taught me to ride a bike. He taught me to fish. He taught me to swim. He taught me to box. Well, he didn't teach me very well. He just taught me, that violence wasn't something I enjoyed, because he would. But and I say this during public speaking, when he was teaching me the box, he would always knock me down, and he would always demand that I get up.
Yep.
And so he was inadvertently teaching me a very valuable lesson. When you get knocked down, you get up. You don't stay there. So anyway, that's another story. But he taught me to shoot. So from a very, very early age, I owned my own weapons, which is why I've always owned weapons, rifles.
Yeah.
So I plotted. I just was waiting until I was sort of like in my mid to late teens, and I thought, well, if this is still happening, I'll put an end to it. But that's the sort of emotional, delusional turmoil that a very young person, man or woman, will go through until you get to a point where you think, well, that's not the solution.
Did you ever
desperation?
Did you ever challenge him or talk to him about it? Did you ever call?
Oh yeah. The first time I ever got knocked out, Colin, my biological father, knocked me out. I remember he'd been away for some time, like months, and he used to go away because when he eventually he got barred from riding, and he wasn't allowed to. He lost his license for bad behaviour. So what he used to do as a jockey, as jockeys used to do, he'd go droving because he was a horseman. He was a very skilled horseman, and so when he wasn't, out of season, he would wrangle horses, and he used to wrangle horses from the top end. Like, he told me stories when he'd come home. I remember he came home and one time, and he always had saddles, you know, he was a jockey.
Yeah.
But I remember, you know, I went into the shed one time and there was a saddle there, and it wasn't a normal saddle, it was an American saddle, right, with a roping horn, and it had this big leather, like a holster. And I remember saying to him, I said, "What's that for, Dad?" And he said, "Oh, well," he pulled out it was a 30325 cut down 303 jungle into a jungle carbine.
Yeah. Which
they cut the 303 down for when the troops started to fight in jungles. I think it's Borneo or somewhere like that. And he used to shoot ferals, and they would. The rifle was held in this like a big holster.
Yeah, yep.
With a swivel, and it was wound around the pommel. And they would ride up beside the buffalo or the horse or, you know, the camel or whatever they were shooting, wild donkeys, pigs, you know, whatever. And they would be able to be riding, and they would be able to sit, like ride right up beside the whatever it was and just bang, you know, be able to hit them somewhere so they could get a heart or a lung shot, you know, so they could maintain, you know, have a kill. So anyway, like, so I got distracted. But one of the times that I came home and I realised that he was there, and so I got off my bike and I was walking up the driveway, and I could hear Mum, and she was crying and she was hysterical, and so I knew what was happening. So I've flown in round the back, I come in the back door into the kitchen, and I just remember her pleading with him, and you know, he was standing in front of her, and he had his hands like that, and I just remember I flew in between him, and I threw my hands up, and I think I might have even thrown one, and then the next thing I wake up, I'm on the couch, and the doctor's there and a couple of the neighbours, and he's gone. You know, I had a like a, and I like this, actually the other eye, but and they said he'd knocked me out. So the first time I'd actually was knocked out at the hands of my own biological father. So that was definitely a moment.
Absolutely, one of many.
One of too many. Yeah.
One of too many.
Yeah.
So, with everything that you've been through, we've got a lot of followers who are battling their own demons. We have a lot of followers, you know, battling mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD. If you could give one piece of advice to anybody out there who's listening to this, who is currently fighting their own battle with the black dog, what would that be? What would be your number one piece of advice for people who are out there fighting the hard fight at the moment?
Well, apart from, you know, the cliche stuff that we're supposed to say, which is true, is that you're not in this alone. You don't have to be in this alone. But if you choose to be, that's a choice. In fact, all of this, all about what we've talked about, and it's about choices. And some choices are made for us. You know, I didn't ask to be abused as a kid. I didn't, you know, asked to have to deal with the loss of one of my children. They're not asked, but they're things that are thrust upon us. But there's a choice you make, that we all make. Do I let this or allow this to define me, or do I take charge? Do I take back my life, and I'll define me?
Perfect.
And there's a moment where that reality hopefully comes to, and it's usually in the most desperate of moments, which is, there's a wisdom to that. But the thing is, there is a wisdom. It is true. And it is the ultimate truth. And there's no such thing as an experience wasted. It doesn't matter how much we've suffered or how much we are going to or what we have to endure. None of it's wasted. None of it happens by accident. It's not like they've written it out before us, but our lives are what our lives are. And the purpose, I believe, is pain is our greatest teacher. I've been saying that from the stage for as long as I can remember. It's our greatest teacher. It's our constant companion. We're not going to have a life without it. It's how we deal with it. And the thing about it is, even in my darkest times, and this last year and a bit, I've seen some darkness that I never thought I would see. I know I'm better than that. I know I'm bigger than that. I know I'm stronger than that. And it can't and won't, and I won't allow it to define me.
Beautiful.
I'll tell you who I am. And I think that we teach more by example than we ever do by instruction. I think it's how you live your life. So, life's tough. So what? I'm alive.
Beautiful.
I wrote that once, hit a song.
There you go. Once again, art imitates life.
Yeah.
Life imitates art. It's one of the two.
Yeah.
Maybe a little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah.
Mate, Angry, from myself, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your brutal honesty and your truth. On behalf of everybody who's listening and on behalf of all Australians, really, you really are, one of the last few true Aussie icons that we have, brother. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us today. And I truly hope that anybody who's listening can take something away from that, from their own experiences.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No, we appreciate you, brother. We appreciate you.
No workers, mate. I mean, the coronavirus aside, we are all of us in this together. And I just want you to believe that because I know it's true.
Yep. Thank you very much, brother. It's much appreciated.
No workers.
Take care, mate.
All right, brother.